You know you're one bad day away from being me.
God forgive me.
My ass remains unwhooped.
I know I've never mentioned him before, but I love Daredevil. There is little doubt in my mind that this is the best superhero show ever put to television. The cinematography, the slow burn, the brutality, the morality, the imagery, the emotion, the themes, the no-cut, long hallway fight scenes. Oh my god, this show! But I have what feels like a stone in the pit of my stomach telling me we're not going to be getting more of that. And before I put any hope or energy into Daredevil Born Again, I want to see if the MCU can do Daredevil right. Having said all that, I will still not be watching She-Hulk. Oddly, I was quite excited for this show when it was first announced, because She-Hulk is a fun, sexy, incredibly unique character. The writers really put a lot into making her her own unique thing.
Feels like somebody's lighting my fire.
And it really, in a very clever way, dealt with how the law would work in a universe where superheroes exist. We got a little bit of that in Civil War, but that was more the big questions about governmental oversight and transparency. This comic dealt with the minutiae, how the law affects people's daily lives, the bureaucratic nature of it, the almost petty aspects of it. For example, I recall a storyline that was entirely centred on whether or not ghosts should be allowed to testify in court. But they didn't only use it in a light-hearted comedic way, but they used it to ask some very, for the time, unique questions. Another story I recall is quite a heartbreaking one about a man who was exposed to radiation, and he sued the company responsible, and their argument was, well, we made you a superhero, your life is better. And he was like, no, I'm radioactive. I destroy things wherever I go. I can't hold down a job. My wife left me. I have nothing. You ruined my life. So yeah, I was really excited for She-Hulk. Plenty of potential to satirize the MCU within the MCU, but in a non-world-breaking sense because you're doing it through the means of exploring the law. Then I saw this quote from the head writer.
In my original pitch, it was an actual trial, and it spanned multiple episodes. When we got into the writer's room, inevitably things change as you're developing the show and as you start writing. And one thing that we all realised very slowly was none of us are that adept at writing, rousing trial scenes.
What is going on? Why would you hire people who have neither the knowledge nor the inclination to write courtroom scenes when your show's subtitle is Attorney at Law? This makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't make sense as a business decision, a creative decision, or even a common sense decision. Why on earth would you hire people this unqualified for the show you're trying to make? So yeah, after seeing that quote, I was resolved to never watch that show. But even though the MCU has always been interconnected, increasingly it's becoming more and more of an obligation almost to watch everything just so you know what's going on.
May I remind you that the Sokovia Accords have been repealed.
So if I want to know what the MCU is going to do with Daredevil, then I'm not going to say I have to, nobody has to, but Daredevil is an important character to me, so I guess if they are going to fully bring him into the MCU and they're going to do it by means of this show, I will. But considering the episodic nature of the show, I'm just going to be watching the episodes he appears in, which is what I think everyone who was baited into watching this show by the appearance of Daredevil could probably have gotten away with doing. I may make passing comments about She-Hulk, but please keep in mind that I have not seen the entire series, so this does not amount to fair and balanced criticism. I'm just going to be commenting on some things I see. Daredevil is the focus of this video. And while watching these 2 episodes, I came up with 5 major concerns. But before we get into those, funnily enough, the thing I was most worried about, the legal aspect of the show, was actually showcased pretty well here. Matt walks in. It's a bit overdone the way the camera and music establish him, as if they're saying, bit patronising to your audience, who you literally baited with the appearance of this character, but joke's on us, I guess. Matt is relatively playful, which is in character for him. Not sure if it's appropriate to joke this way with a judge, but we'll let that one go. The only other complaint I have about this scene is that it has the first of many instances where Daredevil is playing fast and loose with his secret identity. In an attempt to wink to the camera and try and be charming, they have him say things he would never say. He didn't even tell his best friend about his abilities for years. How long did it take for him to let a tiny number of people in enough to be vulnerable enough with them, and now he's just covertly broadcasting his powers? Okay, back up. Let's go through this scene because most of it is actually pretty good. So the setup is, this guy is a tailor who makes suits for superheroes, and this guy is the spoiled rich kid of a client of Jen's firm who fancies himself a superhero. He was injured by one of the suits and is now suing for damages. Jen wants this guy's customer list to be revealed, and this sets up an interesting dilemma about transparency versus privacy when it comes to the nature of secret identities. Matt argues against the validity of Jen's request,
as it's not relevant to the litigation.
Jen comes back with a reasonable argument that poses the idea that keeping this information private means other people could be harmed.
There could be multiple instances of Mr. Jacobson's other clients sustaining injuries from faulty merchandise.
Matt fires back that Jen's theory is just that, a theory, which, legally speaking, is not enough to transcend people's right to privacy.
I would say that's a gross invasion of people's privacy based on a very shaky what if.
Jen comes back with what so much of the law is essentially built on: precedent. Now, anyone who watches legal shows will know that for these kind of motions to be granted, the lawyer has to provide precedent for the situation. But the precedent can be argued against if circumstances call for it, like what Matt does next.
But we're not just talking about a product here. The very nature of Mr. Jacobson's line of work, making suits exclusively for superheroes, necessitates anonymity.
Jen proceeds to attempt to poke holes in this, again with a fairly reasonable argument that superheroes chose to be public figures, therefore there is an expectation and, through that, arguable consent to loss of privacy. But Matt once again shows that the precedent doesn't apply in this case because the difference in circumstance outweighs said precedent. In this case, that in superhero work, privacy can be a matter of life or death for the person in question, as well as loved ones who didn't consent. My god. Is this an actual legal show? Did I misjudge She-Hulk? This is exactly what I was excited for when the show was first announced. Matt also uses his powers to get the case completely thrown out as he smells the wrong kind of fuel used in the boots, completely discrediting this guy's claim. The only problem I have is, again, this cheeky wink to the audience that is completely unnecessary and also not something you could get away with in a courtroom, as it's not even hearsay, it's a lawyer's unsubstantiated opinion.
He's lying.
Counsel, I seriously hope you can substantiate that claim.
Don't ask me how I know, I just know.
I'm dismissing this case.
Seriously, it is so weird how the main argument is so good, so well written, and then they do something as stupid as have a lawyer tell the judge that the opposing counsel's client is lying with no proof or arguments to back that up. So as much as I want to love it, as much as I want to be optimistic, there's just something a bit off. what does this mean for Karen and Matt? And yes, I did go to the hairdressers halfway through filming this. Let's just forget that first part ever happened. They left off season 3 looking like they might try again, so is that just off now? Now, I am by no means a big fan of Karen and Matt. I like Karen as a character. I think she's come a long way, but I don't think these two gel very well. Jen Walters, on the other hand, had the potential to gel very well with Matt, and for one scene, it looks like she is. Okay, there was this one bit that was a bit janky where she essentially insults a blind man's clothes. And there are two charitable interpretations you could have of this. One, this character Luke makes suits for superheroes, so she potentially meant, oh no, I meant obviously because he makes suits for superheroes and you're obviously not a superhero because, you know, But the script doesn't back up this interpretation. Now, another interpretation you could have is that this is a joke. Going back to the whole legal drama thing, opposing counsel sniping at each other within and out with the courts, a very common trope that could have fit in pretty well. But I don't know if it's the script, the acting, or the directing, but Maslany really doesn't deliver this as a joke. She delivers it as if she's sincerely insulting a blind man's clothes, and the blind man has been gracious enough to essentially get her out of that by turning it into a joke. And yes, Matt's suit does look pretty cheap. So you're telling me that resting bitch queen face over here is going to allow his lawyer to represent both him and his business in a suit that cheap? I don't think so. So they just start talking shop, and again, this could be a really good exchange between them, but it inadvertently highlights one of the weaknesses of the script, and that is Jen's incompetence. This is product litigation, right? That means someone is at fault. Before bringing this to the point of getting it to court in front of a judge, she didn't bother to check if it was her client that was at fault. She didn't bother to do the most basic of research.
You came out of nowhere and you made my dumb client admit to being even dumber than I thought he was in court.
No, Jen, no. Your client being dumb is not an excuse for you wasting his goddamn time. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I do a lot of casework in my job, and the prep is the most important part of that. And if I came in this unprepared, oh my god, that would be embarrassing. Jen, you should be embarrassed. Now, this may be tinfoil hat time, but I am starting to believe that due to the stark difference in quality in the writing style between Matt's specific scenes and the rest of the script tells me that there was probably someone else consulting in the writing room specifically for Matt Murdock. I couldn't find any evidence of this in the credits, please tell me if you do, but yeah, there is a real stark contrast going on here. It is pretty distracting. Anyway, back to the scene. Matt is a classic hero, one who believes in the inherent good in people and is willing to put his all into making a better world the classically moral way. Matt has already been through so much, both as a lawyer and a superhero, so he's in a better position than anyone to be a guiding force for Jen in her character journey. This happens in the penultimate episode of the show, so don't know how much weight they can put on that idea. The banter between them is good, with Cox stealing the scene with his easy manner and kind demeanour, and this line is very Daredevil.
Jen Walters can use the law to help people when society fails them. And She-Hulk can help people when the law fails them.
This feels like a Matt who has grown, who has learned from the mistakes he made in his early career. So this is a pretty good scene. The other scenes they're in together, Okay, him hearing how fast her heart is beating is kind of sweet, and it's clear to me these actors could have had chemistry, but the dialogue. Oh, sweet Catholic Christ, the dialogue.
You're very persistent, aren't you?
You're very annoying.
Can you tell me that before we fought?
Why didn't you ask me before immediately trying to whip my ass?
Because they have weapons, Jennifer?
Yeah, good thing She-Hulk is indestructible, Matthew.
Just let me do my thing.
Yeah, and I will do my thing.
My ass remains unwhooped.
You couldn't have just kept them talking like normal people. You had to MCUify them. This is what I'm worried about. Now, like I said, it's not all bad. The comment about her heart beating is good, the legal banter, besides Matt stupidly giving out information that could potentially compromise his identity. The conversation in front of the sign is also good. And quick little tangent, but this is funny. I saw a YouTuber talking about this show. This was before I decided to stop listening to YouTubers talk about She-Hulk. And he, being a religious person himself, was talking about these two hooking up and said, I don't think that's something a devout Catholic would do. Speaking as someone who is educated in this faith, you've never met a modern Catholic, have you? Now forget modern Catholics, have you seen the Borgias? We invented that shit. Yeah, the Protestants have their work ethic and their bear kirks, and the Mormons have their hymns, and it's all very nice and everything, but the Catholics? Yet the Vatican is basically just the Roman Empire 2.0, so Catholicism is basically the sex, drugs and rock and roll of the Christian world. I don't practice. So yeah, that was completely unrelated, I just thought it was funny. So Matt offers to take her to dinner, like the good little Catholic boy he is, very in character for Matt, but Jen says,
yeah, maybe we could skip all of that and just...
Seriously, my boy is doing the gentlemanly thing, dipping his toe in the water, seeing if a relationship will develop, and Mrs. over here is like, I am gagging for it. Though this is definitely not out of character for Jen, she macks on everyone.
Let me guess, big boy, you're the thing.
Yeah, well, I'm Ben, Mr. Grimm.
You may release me now.
Okay, but most men wouldn't be in such a hurry.
But if we're building this as a romance, I think this was a mistake. Like, no judgment on how anyone conducts their relationships in the real world, but narratively speaking, I think this was a mistake.
Morning.
I have no comment. I don't think I necessarily need to make a comment for it to be understood how stupid this scene is. And I don't want to hear, oh, it's just a joke. It's not even a well-crafted joke. It's an action that makes no sense. The last episode doesn't have much Matt, but it is still relevant, so I watched it, and...
Oh, would not mind seeing Daredevil again. A woman has needs.
I've got womanly needs, desires. I want an orgasm!
Okay, as I said, I have not seen enough of this show to properly judge Maslany's performance, and this could be the script, or maybe it's just me, because I have a very sensitive cringe response. I get secondhand embarrassment so easily. I haven't watched TV talent shows since my early teens, but even back then, I could not watch the initial audition stages of those shows. It was that bad. So, it is fully possible that this is just me, but if she pulls another stupid face or does another cringy dance for no reason, I am fast forwarding to where Matt comes in.
Bruce smashes buildings, I smash fourth walls and bad endings. And sometimes Matt Murdock.
Okay.
Seriously, where did he come from? I know this is a sitcom. I don't know if it's absurdist in nature. I mean, there are absurd things happening, but I wouldn't call it an absurdist comedy. But if it was, that would be fine in isolation. But this is a shared universe. You can't just change physics in between shows. You can't run on cartoon logic in one show and then grounded realism in another unless there is an in-universe reason that these kind of things change, like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, for instance. So yeah, you can change tone, but you can't change the logic of the universe. And the fourth wall doesn't give you an excuse to do that, because behind the fourth wall, on the character's side of it, there is still a logic and consistency that exists behind that fourth wall. And he's meeting her parents? They didn't even have a date. They banged once and now he's meeting her parents. A pretty significant relationship milestone, because she has the ability to write what she wants within her story. That is super creepy. I know the writers probably didn't intend for this to come off as creepy, but that is so creepy. Now, imagine I did this, right? Imagine that I meet this guy, we spend the day together, everything seems nice, we might want to see each other again, and then I find out I have the power to commune with what is essentially God, and through that, I find out that I have the ability to basically decide what I want to happen within my own reality, and I say, yeah, you know that guy that I spent one day with and I kind of like? I would like to get him to the point where he's ready to meet my parents. We will be married by Sunday. So yeah, I was kind of on board with this as a potential relationship, even though I think they jumped the gun a little bit, but that just deflated like a balloon. I know, make all the jokes about the Gold Devil you want, I'll join you. In low light, it doesn't look that bad. In broad daylight though, it looks awful, it's ugly, it's fairly ridiculous. Now, to give this as much credit as I can as a creative decision, and by the way, I don't think the She-Hulk writers can be blamed for this. This probably came from on high. Comic books are a very fluid medium. You can be serious, dark, and brutal in one run, and then light, campy, and fun in another. Differences in tone for the same property is not a new thing. My concern is that because this show has cemented this image of Daredevil, and through that has given us some of the greatest superhero storytelling ever made as a result, how are they going to go in a different direction character, story, or tone-wise without diluting the impact or even artistry of the character? And an example of this being done fairly well is John Constantine. No. I promise it's not just an excuse to talk about him. I swear it's relevant this time. The only mainstream content we got with Constantine was that movie. And guys, I know everyone quite rightly loves Keanu Reeves now, but that does not retroactively make this movie good. It is not good. We had what was honestly a pretty great first season of a Constantine show, but that was very sadly unceremoniously cancelled.
What's on the way?
Absolutely nothing, John. Absolutely nothing. But Matt Ryan, who plays Constantine, was invited onto the CW show Arrow as a guest character, and was so well received that he was given a recurring role on Arrow's sister show Legends of Tomorrow. A light, campy, rainbow sci-fi show in which he most definitely does not belong. But to give these writers the credit they deserve, they really put a lot into playing into the darker aspects of John's character within the confines of the light campy sci-fi show they were making. Much like the DCAMU, it is clear that people involved in this project really believed in this character and put a lot of effort into being as true to him as they possibly could, and as a result, exponentially increased his popularity. So for all that John doesn't fit and the show dilutes his character, I can't be mad at it. But Constantine's show had been cancelled, the only movie about him was utter crap, and any projects involving him were, probably for the best, left in limbo. This was the only Constantine anyone could give us, and the attempt was sincere, and again, delivered pretty well within the confines of the light campy sci-fi show they were making. This, on the other hand, is another beast entirely. Daredevil's beloved Netflix show was cancelled, basically for the purpose of bringing him fully into the MCU. So this is not a show trying to do right by a character despite an ill fit and increasing his popularity as a result. This is a character in his prime being reimagined for the purpose of fitting him in when he already had a place he fit in perfectly, making this feel more like viewers have been robbed of something beloved in order to create something nobody was particularly asking for. Jokes are something that used to be a strength of the MCU. Then it slowly devolved into an annoyance until it finally became a detriment. The Netflix shows, though fully and canonically part of the MCU, were able to employ the long-held comic tradition of there being sky heroes and street heroes in order to remain relatively untouched. This allowed the Netflix shows to have a more mature edge to them, whereas when it comes to blockbuster movies with their astronomical budgets, it's in their best interest to try and appeal to the widest demographic possible. And don't even get me started on the rating system. You don't even need to be paying that much attention to notice a massive tone shift between the movies and TV shows. Not that that's the case anymore. I covered streaming services and their evolution in my media video, but just to touch upon that again. But due to the nature of how these services were funded, streaming platforms were able to create new and relatively innovative content without the limitations placed upon them by demographics, ratings, and so on. But with media moving away from cinema and onto streaming platforms who have to compete with each other, that is sadly no longer the case. Which is why Phase 4 seems to have devolved into the lowest common denominator appeal in terms of story and comedy. Whereas before, the natural chemistry and charisma of the actors and the unique style of some directors allowed the comedy to flow, I'd say, most of the time. Now it seems to have become a parody of itself. Now, why does this worry me in regards to Daredevil despite the obvious tone problems? Well, Daredevil's not a show absent humour. In fact, its wit is one of the most charming things about it. It uses the intelligence and skill set of the characters to create a kind of comedy that is not quippy like the movies, but is not so far removed from it either. This is because our characters are lawyers who have to be witty, charming, argumentative speakers in order to do their jobs. So that kind of wit and natural back and forth plays well with their interactions with each other and other characters. Not to mention the show having characters who have known each other for years, so it can lean on the natural chemistry and easy back and forth long-term friends would have. This?
I had trouble finding parking. I'm just kidding.
Cox manages to deliver these lines with some semblance of charm, but... Really? You had to have him walk in with an extremely lazy blind joke. You couldn't think of anything else? Now, the Daredevil show did mine that blindness for comedy, but the reason that worked so well is because it basically had two forms of it. One was the specific instances between Matt and Foggy making actual jokes or having banter about his blindness because they're best friends and you can take the piss out of your friends like that.
You don't necessarily show the best judgment when beautiful women are involved.
How would I even know if she's a beautiful woman?
I don't know. It's kind of spooky, actually.
And two came from when another character made a faux pas and they used that for a bit of gentle mockery.
She just curtsied. It was adorable.
Luke Jacobson made a couple of new suits for me, so I owed him one.
Doesn't really look like it.
This is just a blind man walking in, telling a blind joke, and not even a very good one. Now, I know there is the famous phrase, open with a joke, but the truth is, 50% of the time, opening with a joke is a surefire way to get whomever you're speaking to stop taking you seriously. And I think they missed a serious trick here, comedy-wise. Serious being the operative word. I expect an argument will be that this is a goofy, light-hearted sitcom, so of course Daredevil's gonna have to lighten up. I completely disagree. Comedy is incredibly subjective, so if you found this show funny, then, well, I'm here to tell you that no, you actually didn't find it funny. That laugh you gave while watching the show, it wasn't a real laugh. Okay, joking aside, comedy is a very subjective art form, perhaps the most subjective of the art forms, though that can be argued. But there is also a very clear subjectivity to it, and in comedy's case, it's the intelligence involved in the construction of the joke. Now, this may just be a difference in nationality.
Y'all have a lot of subtext, and y'all like stuff like irony and sarcasm, tongue-in-cheek. Man, you know, clever ways to be indirect about what you think.
But I did not find this show funny in the slightest. The mistake I believe they made with Daredevil was trying to turn him into the quip machine that every single other MCU character has become lately. They should have kept Daredevil serious, not only to keep him in character, but to mine that for comedy. The comedic tactic of having a straight man is a tried and true method, and often the more serious the better. An obvious example in comics is anytime Batman and Superman team up, or Batman teams up with anyone really.
You won't do that again. Unless I want to.
The Batman Ninja Turtles movie and the recent Super Sons movie, the former being an action comedy and the latter being a cute, light-hearted kids superhero story, used this to great effect. Even the recent The Batman movie worked in moments of levity, and many of them came from just how serious Pattinson played it.
Thumb drive.
So yeah, this need to replicate Joss Whedon's snappy back and forth dialogue from the 2012 Avengers movie is just... Well, 10 years on, I say it got desperate a while ago. So despite this show being very brutal, dark, and often bleak, Daredevil is by no means a character absent mirth. You just have to employ it in the correct way, which I don't think current MCU has the ability to pull off. Speaking of things current MCU is unable to pull off, much of the same things I said about the MCU's humour can be repeated here. Which of the two is more concerning is ultimately up to you. But as I said, the divide between those who battled world-ending threats like the Avengers and those who fought gangsters and more community-based threats allowed the Netflix shows to kind of exist in their own reality while still reasonably being connected to the MCU. And that allowed the shows to go so much further with their action. Now, I have never believed that you need to see blood and guts for the action to be good, but it is a necessary component if what you want to get across is sheer brutality. Now, the first ever hallway fight scene Daredevil gave us doesn't really have any of that, and yet the grounded nature of the brutal actions on screen was still portrayed magnificently, so there are ways to get around this. Can the MCU do that? In its current form, I don't think so. A famously beloved aspect of Daredevil is the long-take hallway fight scenes. The creators, writers, actors, stunt coordinators, everyone who worked on this show saw how well this went over in the first season and of course, capitalised on it. But did they rest on their laurels? Oh no. They put heart and intelligence and artistry into every one of those scenes. They stepped up their game every single time. Hell, Season 3 has a long take that lasts a solid 11 minutes. Daredevil has to get out of a prison full of people trying to kill him, and you think, how the hell are they going to pull this off without making him OP? He fights, he calls for help, he hides, he negotiates, so when Matt finally gets out of that hellhole and breathes a sigh of relief, we breathe with him. Whereas how many cuts are in this hallway fight scene? A problem many people have been complaining about far longer than I have can be illustrated in this scene. Artists of the previous MCU phases did amazing groundbreaking work that redefined and re-energized the superhero genre, and people loved them. Current MCU takes things you already love and says, hey, here's that thing you love. References, Easter eggs, jokes, cameos, it's all just so tired. And I think now with the comedy gone, reduced to the same copy-paste back and forth, the story's gone, reduced to telling the same story with a different skin over and over, and in some cases pointing out that that is what you are doing and thinking that makes it okay. There are two things left to disappear from the MCU, leaving it empty. And if that happens to Daredevil, that might quite possibly be the breaking point for me. One is character, and the other is I know She-Hulk is a show with a much lighter tone, so Daredevil's action and themes wouldn't really fit in well here, so I'm not advocating for that. However, if you look at recent MCU, or even classic MCU, there isn't much to suggest that they could pull that off outside of the Netflix shows. I know we are supposed to be getting an R-rated Deadpool movie, but Fox already took that risk, so at this point, Disney is going to have to follow through lest people go to a Deadpool movie and not get what they expect from one. Daredevil Born Again has been touted as something of a soft reboot, and I wouldn't put it past them to make it a full-blown hard reboot. Especially since they already did the Born Again storyline in season 3, so what the hell are they gonna do? And also a hard reboot would allow them to keep it at the most marketable rating possible. And Daredevil is bad enough, but what about Mr. Big Bad Punisher over here? What are you gonna do next time Frank wants to try out Joker's disappearing pencil trick? How are you gonna make that work? The sheer brutality of Frank Castle and all the Daredevil villains allowed for a lot of moral questions to be asked about how far one should go in the pursuit of justice. Frank and Matt's relationship and moral divide was one of the most interesting parts of the show and an incredible exploration of the moral failings of a no-killing imperative versus the damage a commitment to lethal force can do, not only to those on the receiving end, but society and the soul of the person meting out that kind of justice. The only other property I've seen tackle this nearly as well is Under the Red Hood. Hell, this wasn't even something you could explore in the previous phases if it weren't for the separation of the shows and movies. Now that the shows are just longer versions of the movies, and there are even arguments that many of them should have been movies, and also being under the Disney banner, that means there's even less they can do because of Disney's long-protected family-friendly brand identity. We could spend all day picking apart the themes of Daredevil, but instead of doing that, let's just focus on the main two. Its view on religion, and its view on justice. The latter is perhaps the best use of Catholic iconography, ideas, mythology, and imagery I've seen since Hellblazer. It is brilliant in the sense that it puts the problems inherent in the church and even belief itself right in front of the viewer. One of many examples is Matt's mother, who was a student nun who fell in love with his father and decided to leave the convent for him before she took her vows. Then after Matt was born, she mistook her own postpartum depression for a sign that she'd betrayed God, which led to her staying out of Matt's life, watching him suffer through becoming blind, becoming orphaned, being alone, and being recruited by Stick. It even points out the hypocritical and often sinister things promoted in the Bible.
God rained shit and misery on the life of his most perfect servant, and still, Job would not curse him.
But it does not do this to bash the faith, quite the opposite. It asks really tough questions about how to remain true to your faith in an ever-changing world. How do you take lessons from your holy text when they no longer fit the world you live in? And ultimately, Matt chooses to remain true to his beliefs. His faith is tested time and time again he remains faithful because that is part of what makes him strong. Now, as someone who is not faithful but has friends who are, I truly appreciate this nuanced look at the religion I was educated in. And on a slightly personal note, it did help me resolve some lingering bitterness I didn't even know I was holding on to. Can you see the MCU pulling this off now? Can you see them taking the risk making commentary like this? Perhaps they could, it's not impossible, but...
You know what I realized? Job was a pussy.
I doubt it. And lastly, the arguably even more complicated theme is that of justice. We already talked a bit about the brilliant dichotomy between Matt and Frank, but there are so many people in this show who challenge Matt's faith in the justice system and his belief on how justice should be meted out. Again, we could spend ages going over Stick, Elektra, Frank, all of whom challenge Matt in different ways, but the biggest one, the one who pushed his resolve to breaking point, was Kingpin. Season 3 was Matt's lowest, both in terms of faith in God and in justice. And the entire season was a struggle to either regain those or lose them forever. Matt is utterly tormented by the fact that Kingpin is so wealthy and so powerful that the law is just not equipped to handle him. No jail cell is fit to contain him. Matt comes to believe that due to being on Kingpin's radar, even being alive puts his loved ones in danger. He makes himself truly and utterly alone for the first time. He becomes almost all devil and very little Matt. And for a time in this season, he genuinely believes killing Fisk is the only way. But letting people back in, letting God back in, is what allows him to refrain. Now, I'm not going to throw my hat in the ring as to whether this is right or wrong. I'll have a whole video on the no killing rule very far sometime in the future. But when it comes to asking the question if it's right or wrong, I honestly don't think that's what matters.
Come on! Kill me! No! God knows I want you. But you don't get to destroy who I am. You will live the rest of your miserable life in a cage, knowing that this city rejected you. It beat you. I beat you.
And what does the MCU do? Undoes it all. I know that it's easy to write Kingpin out of this situation, but that completely undermines Matt's development. It means he didn't overcome Fisk in his own way. He didn't beat him while retaining who he is as a man. He lost again. For those of you that are just tuning into my channel, I have a mantra: don't watch things you expect to disappoint you. And more importantly, don't talk about things you expect to disappoint you. And I'm not talking about negative or even virulently negative criticism. No, I'm here for that. I'm talking about people who watch things that they know is going to be bad and they know they're not going to like, but they do it just so they have the privilege of telling the multi-billion-dollar corporation just how bad their non-refundable product that they bought and unintentionally promoted on their own platforms is. Because yes, that is how shows are marketed these days, and we are the tools through which it is done. Now, I went further into why this is in another video, but if you don't want to watch that, I have an analogy for you. And I apologize, I am not normally this crude. But not only do I think the analogy is apt, but I think the strength of the analogy is warranted in order to convey my frustration and how convinced I am that this is what is destroying media these days, especially in relation to beloved pre-existing IPs. It's like this guy asks you for a blowjob and you know his dick is going to taste awful, but you do it anyway just so you are able to tell him in no uncertain terms with sheer fine-tooth comb levels of analysis just how awful his dick tastes. And then you stand up and say, right, let that be a lesson to you. You already gave him the blowjob. Why? Does he have any reason to care how much you're gagging afterwards? If anything, it's just going to encourage him to come back and ask for more, and you say, oh, you didn't learn your lesson the first time? Well, I'll show you. And the cycle continues. Sorry, I'm just cranky right now because my YouTube recommendations are so messed up right now, and I'm trying to get rid of all these videos containing people who watch things that they know they're going to hate and know are going to be bad, but talk about it thinking they're sticking it to the man when they're really just doing exactly what the corporation wants them to do. We are the problem. And I'm not talking about people who go into something with the assumption that it at least has the possibility of being good. I'm talking about people who specifically seek out media they know they're going to hate just for the purpose of speaking about it on their platforms to people who have either seen the thing or had no intention of watching it to begin with, plastering the name everywhere. But as I said in my previous video, there is no perfect solution to this criticism equals marketing problem. We can't just say, well, it's bad, therefore I'm not going to talk about it. No, that stifles necessary critique. So I proposed the only thing I feel I could, which is that if you feel like you are watching something beyond just hating it and telling others how much you hate it,
It's the only thing that gets me out of bed every morning.
The hatred.
Yes, Pam, the hatred.
then by all means I believe it's worth a chance. I gave up on She-Hulk because I knew from that article the writers were not qualified for the job they were doing. Seriously, why would I consume a product when I have proof in front of me that the people who made it do not know what they're doing? Why do we treat media this way when we wouldn't treat any other product this way? Imagine going into a Chinese restaurant and the people in charge of the restaurant said, yeah, we had this idea for a Chinese restaurant, but it was only when we were sitting down and hashing everything out that we realised none of us knew anything about Chinese food. Why would you ever visit that restaurant again? But I do understand, and this video is clear evidence of that, feeling trapped in regards to critiquing the MCU and other existing franchises like it. I didn't go see The Eternals, I didn't watch Miss Marvel or What If or really any of the shows after Loki besides, I think, Hawkeye. But the MCU not only holds a special place in my heart as something I grew up with, something that shaped me as a fan of the genre, but it still holds so many characters I hold love for, ones who helped me sort out my views and feelings on some very real-world issues. And if you have characters like that, the MCU doesn't exactly make it easy for you to opt out. The MCU badly wants its fans to continue following, and while back in Phase 1 and even to an extent Phase 2 you didn't need to tune into every movie, the only exceptions were the big event/final chapter movies where I think it's kind of both expected and advertised that you need to know the story to understand the final chapter. But now, with throwaway lines such as this,
May I remind you that the Sokovia Accords have been repealed.
plot points such as this,
This is my son, Scar.
and character after character popping up, they have kind of made it a necessity for you to see everything, not only to get the most satisfying experience, but an experience that makes any sense at all. Those in charge of how She-Hulk was marketed putting Daredevil in the trailers is just one of many examples of them using what is already loved to carry on benefiting from that loyal viewership. It feels in a way like they're holding the characters you love hostage, and in order to see if they're okay, you need to seek out proof of life. And I know that is an incredibly over-dramatized way of putting it. These things happening to the properties we love is not evil, it's not sacrilegious, it's not traumatizing, it's not a great war for the soul of the culture. It's just sad. The only way to deal with business is to not buy or promote the product, and the money will do the talking. Sure, there will be some people who write to the chocolate company saying they have to bring back the egg-flavoured chocolate bar. It was genius, the best chocolate bar you ever made. But you do not need to engage with these people. If the product is good, it will remain. If it's not, it will fade. So stop putting fuel in the dying car. So I've been pretty in and out of the MCU since Loki's ending fell flat for me, but I've still been a semi-regular consumer. However, I think Daredevil Born Again will be make or break for me. If they pull this off, with all the reasons it shouldn't work, that will be enough to convince me that there is still talent in the MCU to get behind. But as far as the universe, the idea that once was, I don't think that exists anymore. And while we're on the subject of corporations and money talking, next year I'll be taking a look at the Amazon Prime series The Boys and my
unyielding rage!
Irritation at people's less than respectful view of the comic and its writer. Because you come for Garth Ennis, you come for me. The Boys comic is a work of genius, and I'm going to make every single last one of you respect it if it's the last thing I do. Have a happy new year, everyone. And of course, tell me what you thought of Phase 4 of the MCU. Are you still watching and loving? Have you fallen out of love and still in the relationship? Or have you kicked that no good son of a bitch to the curb and gotten on with your life? Whatever it is, I'll be glad to hear it, because I am very, very close to being done.